That tattoo. My mother wore one exactly like it. You get that in some back alley shop for 10 bucks. The words, laced with the casual cruelty of unearned confidence, echoed off the corrugated steel walls of the briefing hangar. The small group of Navy SEALs, hardened men accustomed to the language of violence and bravado, shifted their weight. A few offered up the cheap currency of nervous chuckles, a social tax paid to the alpha of the moment. Petty Officer First Class Bull Rourke, a man whose neck was as thick as his assumptions, grinned, proud of his little performance. He stood over the seated figure, a human eclipse blocking the harsh halogen lights. His target, Specialist Anya Sharma, didn't flinch. She didn't look up. She didn't offer a single acknowledgement that the insult had even registered in her airspace. Her world was the medical kit spread before her on the dusty floor, a meticulous universe of gauze, tourniquets, and surgical steel. Her hands, slender and steady, moved with an unhurried, hypnotic grace, repacking a chest trauma kit with the focus of a watchmaker. The tattoo in question was a subtle mark on the inside of her right forearm, visible only because her sleeve was slightly rolled up. It was a simple, stylized black trident, no larger than a thumbprint, with a single, elegant serpent coiled around its shaft. It was the kind of understated ink that didn't scream for attention, which seemed to infuriate Bull even more. He saw weakness in her silence, mistaking stillness for fear. He saw a box ticker, a diversity hire sent to clutter his kill zone with her inexperience. He saw her slight frame, her youth, and the quiet intensity in her dark eyes, and his mind, a blunt instrument of prejudice, drew a simple, dismissive conclusion. But across the room, leaning against a stack of Pelican cases, Master Chief Thorne saw something else. He saw the impossible economy of her movements. He saw the way her posture, even while seated on the floor, was perfectly balanced, a study in coiled potential. And when his old eyes briefly caught a glimpse of that simple tattoo, a flicker of something ancient and deeply buried stirred within his memory, a ghost story told in hushed tones in faraway places. He watched the scene unfold, a silent arbiter holding his judgment in reserve. The air grew thick with the injustice of it all, a palpable tension that mixed with the scent of diesel and ozone. The other men, members of SEAL Team 5's Alpha Platoon, were caught in the gravitational pull of Bull's arrogance, their silence a form of complicity. They were about to step outside the wire, into a part of the world that had forgotten mercy, and this internal friction was a dangerous prelude. Yet, Specialist Sharma remained an island of calm in a sea of testosterone and tension. Her silence wasn't empty. It was dense, a shield forged not of anger, but of a discipline so profound it needed no defense. It was a silence that said, "Your words are wind. My work is gravity. If you believe that true strength is measured not in decibels, but in deeds, type competence below." The pre-mission brief continued, a drone of coordinates, threat assessments, and rules of engagement, but the real briefing had already happened. The platoon's internal dynamics had been laid bare. Bull Rourke, emboldened by Sharma's non-reaction, continued his campaign of quiet contempt. It wasn't loud anymore. It was a series of small, dismissive gestures. He'd check his M4, then glance at her, a smirk playing on his lips as if comparing a deadly weapon to a decorative accessory. He loudly asked the other team medic, a seasoned corpsman named Doc Russo, if he had packed enough bandages to cover the inevitable, a clear and pointed barb aimed at the perceived fragility of their new attachment. Russo, to his credit, just grunted and tightened a strap on his pack, refusing to feed the beast. Specialist Sharma, meanwhile, had moved on to inspecting the platoon's personal first aid kits, the small pouches worn on every operator's belt. She moved from man to man, her presence unobtrusive, almost ethereal. When she came Bull, she simply knelt, her hand extended, waiting for him to pass her the kit. He held it for a moment too long, a petty power play. "You sure you know what you're looking for in there, sweetheart?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "Wouldn't want you to mix up the aspirin with the C4." She said nothing. Her eyes, focused on the pouch, were unreadable. Finally, with an exasperated sigh, he dropped it into her waiting hand. She unzipped it with a single fluid motion. Her fingers danced inside, a rapid inventory conducted by touch alone. She removed a packet of outdated clotting agent, her movements sharp and decisive. She replaced it with a new one from her own supply. Then she felt something else. A small, hard object tucked into a side pocket. She pulled it out. It was a laminated photo of a smiling woman with a young boy on her lap, Bull's mother and him as a child. A flicker of something, perhaps the first hint of emotion, crossed Sharma's face. It wasn't pity or anger. It was a quiet, professional acknowledgement of the man's hidden vulnerability. She carefully placed the photo back, ensuring it was secure, zipped the pouch, and handed it back to him. Her eyes met his for the first time. They were calm, clear, and utterly devoid of the fear or indignation he had been trying so desperately to provoke. She simply nodded once and moved to the next man. The interaction left Bull feeling strangely hollow, his insults turning to ash in his mouth. He had thrown his heaviest punches, and they had passed through her like smoke. This quiet, unassuming woman was a fortress, and he was beginning to realize, with a dawning sense of unease, that he had no idea what was inside. Her competence was a silent rebuke, a language he was not equipped to understand. He mistook her discipline for detachment, her focus for frailty. It was an assumption that would soon be tested by the crucible of combat, an error in judgment that would be paid for in blood. The Afghan night was absolute, a black velvet canvas pricked by the cold, distant light of a billion stars. The helicopter's approach was a masterpiece of stealth, a dead-stick landing that barely disturbed the dust of the valley floor. The ramp dropped, and SEAL Team 5 moved like shadows into the oppressive darkness, a silent, lethal organism. Specialist Sharma moved with them, not at the rear as Bull had expected, but tucked in behind the point man, a position of extreme danger and tactical importance. Her steps were weightless, her silhouette merging seamlessly with the larger forms of the operators around her. For 2 hours, the mission was a study in flawless execution. They infiltrated the target compound, a known insurgent bomb-making factory, with a brutal efficiency that was their trademark. The silence was broken only by the short, sharp whispers of their suppressed weapons. But as they prepared to exfiltrate, the world tore itself apart. The pressure plate IED was a secondary device, placed not on the ingress route, but on the egress, a trap laid with patient, malevolent cunning. The explosion was a physical blow, a concussive wave of force and fire that threw men like dolls. The night erupted into a symphony of chaos. The roar of the blast was followed by the high, angry chatter of multiple machine gun positions opening up from the surrounding ridges, a complex, coordinated ambush. The air filled with the snap and crack of supersonic rounds, the scream of ricochets, and the guttural cries of wounded men. Doc Russo was down, hit in the initial blast. 2 other SEALs were wounded, their calls for a medic strained and desperate. Bull Rourke, who had been near the epicenter, was thrown against a wall, his helmet cam footage a dizzying, fractured nightmare before going dark. Through the strobing hell of muzzle flashes and tracer rounds, Anya Sharma was a study in impossible calm. While others sought cover, she moved toward the danger. Her training, buried deep in her muscle memory, took over. She wasn't a specialist anymore. She was an instrument of preservation. Her mind became a cold, clear engine of triage. She crawled through the dust and debris, the ground trembling with the impact of incoming fire, her movements low and economical. She reached the first wounded SEAL, her hands already working, applying a tourniquet high on his leg, her voice in his ear, calm and authoritative, cutting through his pain and panic. "Breathe. I have you. You're not going to die." She moved to the next man, then the next, a phantom of efficiency in the maelstrom. Her hands, which Bull had mocked just hours before, were now the most valuable asset on the battlefield. They packed wounds, inserted chest tubes, and administered morphine with a steadiness that defied the apocalyptic scene around her. She was the calm at the center of the storm, a single point of order in a universe of violent chaos. The call came over the comms, choked with static and desperation. "Bull is hit. He's hit bad. Neck wound. We can't stop the bleeding." Anya heard it, and without hesitation, she began to move toward his last known position. It was across 50 yards of open ground, a veritable shooting gallery raked by machine gun fire from two different angles. The other SEALs screamed at her to stay down, that it was suicide. She didn't listen. Her mission parameters had changed. The objective was no longer a compound. It was the life of the man who had scorned her. She moved in a low, serpentine crawl, using the scant cover of rocks and bomb craters. Rounds kicked up dust inches from her face, the sonic cracks deafeningly close. She was not a warrior born to this kind of movement, yet she moved with an innate, primal understanding of angles and exposure. She was a leaf in the wind, a ghost in the machine of death. She found Bull slumped against the remnants of a mud brick wall, his face pale in the moonlight, his hand clamped uselessly to the side of his neck where a torrent of dark blood pulsed between his fingers. His eyes were wide with a terror that no amount of training could ever erase. The primal fear of a man watching his own life drain away. He tried to speak, but only a gurgling sound came out. Panic was setting in, and his struggling was making the bleeding worse. Anya slid in beside him, her body a small shield against the incoming fire. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice cutting through his fear like a scalpel. He focused on her, his panicked eyes locking on her calm ones. "Hold still. I have you." She ripped open her pack, her movements a blur of precision. This was not a wound you could pack with gauze. It was a carotid artery bleed, the deadliest injury on the battlefield, a death sentence measured in seconds. She had one chance. With one hand, she applied direct pressure, her fingers digging deep to find the source. With the other, she retrieved a hemostatic clamp from a sterilized pouch. It was a tool for field surgery, a piece of equipment far beyond the scope of a standard medic's kit. She worked under the flickering, hellish light of the firefight, her world narrowing to the few square inches of ravaged flesh on Bull's neck. A stray round ricocheted off the wall behind her, showering them with debris. She didn't even blink. Her hands remained impossibly steady. She found the artery a slick, writhing thing, and with a single decisive movement, she applied the clamp. The torrent of blood slowed, then stopped. It was a procedure of breathtaking risk and skill, performed in the dark, under fire, on a panicking patient. It was a miracle. The immediate crisis averted, she worked to stabilize him, her hands a blur of life-saving activity. The other SEALs, who had been providing covering fire, watched in stunned, disbelieving silence. They had just witnessed something that defied belief. The unassuming medic, the woman they had allowed to be mocked, had just walked through fire and stared death in the face to save the man who had belittled her, and she had won. Bull, conscious but weak, could only stare at her, at the simple tattoo on the forearm of the steady hand that had just pulled him back from the abyss. The arrogance was gone, washed away by his own blood, replaced by a profound, shattering sense of awe. The extraction was a blur of controlled chaos, but back at the FOB, a heavy, contemplative silence had fallen over Alpha Platoon. They sat in the debriefing room, covered in the grime and blood of the battle, the adrenaline slowly seeping from their bodies, leaving behind in bone-deep exhaustion. But it was more than that. A fundamental shift had occurred within the team's soul. They looked at Specialist Sharma differently now. She sat slightly apart from them, quietly cleaning her medical instruments, her focus as intense as it had been before the mission. She was the same person, yet she was utterly transformed in their eyes. They had seen her work. They had seen the calm, the precision, the impossible courage. They had seen a level of medical expertise that none of them, not even Doc Russo, had ever witnessed in the field. Bull Rourke was there, heavily bandaged and sedated, but lucid, refusing to be taken to the main hospital until the debrief was over. He couldn't speak, but his eyes never left Sharma, following her every movement with an expression of raw, humbled reverence. Master Chief Thorne entered the room, his presence immediately commanding the full attention of every man. He was a living legend in the community, a man who had seen more combat than all of them combined. His face was a mask of grim authority, but his eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned the room, taking in the new dynamic. He listened to the initial report from the platoon's lieutenant, his gaze lingering on Bull's life-saving field dressing, then on Sharma. The lieutenant's account was technical, but the awe in his voice was unmistakable when he described Sharma's actions. When he finished, Thorne walked slowly across the room, his boots silent on the concrete floor. He stopped not in front of the lieutenant, but in front of Sharma. She looked up, her expression neutral. Thorne's gaze dropped to her forearm, to the small, unassuming tattoo. The room became so quiet that the hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like a roar. The Master Chief stared at the mark for a long, silent moment. The ghost of a memory he'd had earlier was now a fully formed specter. He had seen that mark once before, 20 years ago, on the arm of a medic who had single-handedly held a casualty collection point against overwhelming odds in Mogadishu. A man they called a ghost. A man they called an angel. He finally looked up from the tattoo and met Sharma's eyes. He didn't ask a question. He made a statement, his voice low and gravelly, yet it carried the weight of absolute authority. The carotid clamp, he said. The percutaneous cricothyrotomy on Miller. The bilateral needle decompression on Diaz. That's not in the 18 Delta course load. He wasn't talking to the room. He was talking only to her, a professional acknowledging a peer. Anya Sharma simply met his gaze and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the confirmation he needed. Thorne straightened to his full height, turning to address the stunned and silent members of Alpha Platoon. His voice was no longer conversational. It was the voice of command, the voice of a man about to etch a lesson into their very souls. "You men think you're the tip of the spear," he began, his words cold and sharp. "You think that because you passed BUD/S, because you wear that trident on your chest, that you are the pinnacle. You are wrong." He let the words hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket of truth. There are levels to this game you don't even know exist. There are operators who have no name, who wear no patch, whose victories will never be recorded. They're the ghosts in the machine, the master craftsmen sent to fix what men like you break. He took a step toward Bull, his eyes boring into the wounded SEAL. "You see this tattoo?" he said, gesturing toward Sharma's arm. "You think it's a decoration. You think you can buy it in a shop. You are a fool." The word landed with the force of a physical blow. Bull flinched. "That is not a tattoo," Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a tone of reverence and awe. "It's a sigil. It's a marker burned into the skin of the only people on this planet who have passed the final test of the Angel program. You don't earn it with strength or speed. You earn it with a steady hand when the world is on fire. You earn it by demonstrating the ability to perform complex surgery in the dark, under fire, with nothing but what you can carry on your back." He paused, letting the weight of his revelation sink in. The SEALs exchanged shocked, disbelieving glances. The Angel program was a myth, a ghost story whispered in bars and training camps. It was the boogeyman of special operations medicine, a clandestine Tier 1 unit of pararescue jumpers, combat surgeons, and medics whose skills were said to be supernatural. They were supposedly attached, unannounced, to units undertaking missions with a near-zero probability of survival. They were the ultimate insurance policy, the saviors of last resort. "Specialist Sharma," Thorne said, turning back to her, his voice now laced with a profound respect that bordered on veneration. He completely disregarded the rank on her uniform. He addressed her by the title she had truly earned. "Surgeon, on behalf of these men and the entire United States Navy, I apologize for the ignorance you have been forced to endure." Then he did something that no one in that room had ever seen. Master Chief Thorne, a man who hadn't saluted an officer in a decade unless it was a general, squared his shoulders, brought his hand up in a slow, crisp salute, and held it. The silence was broken by the sound of shuffling. One by one, the other 5 members of SEAL Team 5, their faces a mixture of shame, awe, and newfound understanding, rose to their feet. They turned to face Anya Sharma. And in the dusty, blood-stained debriefing room of a forgotten FOB, 5 of the most dangerous men on the planet rendered a slow, solemn salute to the quiet woman who had saved them. The story of what happened in that debriefing room, and more importantly, what happened in that blood-soaked valley, spread through the special operations community not like wildfire, but like a slow-moving electrical current. It traveled through secure channels, in hushed conversations in chow halls from Bagram to Coronado. The legend of the Angel of FOB Reaper was born. The details, as they always do, became embellished. In some versions, she took on the entire insurgent force single-handedly before performing open-heart surgery with a pocket knife. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained intact and potent. The quietest person in the room was the most dangerous. The unassuming medic with the $10 tattoo was a ghost, a member of a unit so elite that most soldiers didn't even believe it existed. The tale became a parable, a powerful cautionary lesson for every arrogant young operator who believed his own hype. Instructors at BUD/S began to tell a sanitized version of it, a story about an unnamed medic and an unnamed SEAL team, to drive home the lesson of humility and the importance of respecting support personnel. The phrase, "check your assumptions," became a common refrain. For Alpha Platoon, the change was immediate and permanent. The dynamic of the team was fundamentally reforged in the fire of that night. They moved with a new sense of unity, but it was a unity centered not on bravado, but on a shared, humbling secret. Their respect for Sharma was absolute. They called her Doc Angel, but never to her face. To her face, they called her ma'am, a title of respect they offered to no other specialist. They would part ways for her in a corridor. They would fall silent when she entered a room. It was not fear, it was a deep and abiding reverence. Bull Rourke's transformation was the most profound. His body healed, but his soul was permanently altered. The arrogance that had been his defining characteristic was stripped away, burned out of him by shame and gratitude. A few weeks after the ambush, he found Sharma in the empty mess hall late at night, where she was studying a medical textbook under a single dim light. He stood before her, his large frame seeming to shrink. "Ma'am," he began, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "I have no words. What I said, what I thought, it was an insult to you, to your skill, and to the memory of my own mother who taught me better. All I can say is that I am sorry. And thank you. You gave me my life back. I promise I will not waste it." Anya looked up from her book, her expression as calm and unreadable as ever. She listened to his heartfelt, broken apology, then simply nodded. "We are a team, petty officer," she said, her voice soft. "That's all that matters." She then offered him a small, almost imperceptible smile. For Bull, that small gesture of forgiveness was a profound absolution. He had been humbled, and in that humility, he found a better version of himself. He became a better SEAL, a better leader, and a better man, all because of the quiet professional he had been foolish enough to underestimate. The legacy of that night became woven into the fabric of the command. It wasn't just a story, it became a cultural touchstone. A few months after the mission, a small, informal ceremony was held in the team's ready room. Master Chief Thorne was there, along with the entire platoon. On the wall, where they mounted trophies from successful operations, they placed a new item. It was a simple shadow box. Inside, mounted on black velvet, was the small, twisted piece of shrapnel that Anya Sharma had pulled from Bull Rourke's neck. Beneath it, a small brass plaque was engraved with 4 simple words. Assumptions are heavier than lead. It became a ritual for every new operator who joined the team. They would be brought to the ready room and made to stand before the shadow box, and an older member of the team, often Bull himself, would tell them the story. He would tell them about his own arrogance, about his ignorance, and about the quiet, unassuming medic who walked through hell to save his life. He would point to the plaque and say, "That is the most important lesson you will ever learn here. The weapon that will get you killed fastest isn't an enemy's rifle. It's your own ego. Never assume you know who is standing next to you. Never mistake silence for weakness. Because the person you disrespect today might be the one holding your life in their hands tomorrow." Anya Sharma, for her part, remained unchanged by the legend that grew up around her. She deflected every compliment, every expression of awe. When younger medics, hearing the rumors, would approach her with nervous questions about the Angel program, she would simply shake her head. "There is no program," she would say. "There is only the work. Focus on the work. The patient on your table doesn't care about your reputation. They only care about the steadiness of your hands." She became a mentor, not through lectures or war stories, but through example. She taught a philosophy of quiet competence. She taught that true professionalism was a relentless dedication to craft, a pursuit of excellence for its own sake, not for glory or recognition. Her presence elevated everyone around her. She didn't demand respect, she inspired it. She didn't seek authority, she embodied it. She was living proof that a legacy is not built on the stories you tell about yourself, but on the stories others tell about you when you have left the room. Her silence, once mistaken for weakness, was now understood for what it truly was, the quiet hum of a perfectly calibrated, supremely competent soul. Years passed. The dust of Afghanistan was replaced by the salt spray of the Pacific, the landscape of war ever shifting. Master Chief Thorne stood on a podium at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, the warm California sun on his weathered face. It was his retirement ceremony after 35 years of service. An audience of decorated officers, grizzled senior enlisted men, and fresh-faced young SEALs sat before him, a multi-generational tapestry of the community he had served his entire adult life. He spoke of battles won and friends lost, of the changing nature of warfare and the timeless nature of the warrior spirit. Towards the end of his speech, his voice grew softer, more reflective. Of all the things I've seen, he said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, the moments that have defined me, the lessons that have truly endured, have not always been the loudest ones. They haven't always been the moments of explosive action. Sometimes, the most important lessons arrive in silence. He then told a story. He didn't use names or locations. He simply spoke of a forward operating base in a forgotten corner of the world. He spoke of a team of elite warriors, confident to the point of arrogance. And he spoke of a young, quiet medic who was judged and dismissed based on her appearance. He described a night of fire and blood, a moment of impossible courage, and a display of skill so profound it bordered on the divine. He told them about a tattoo that was not a tattoo, and a specialist who was in fact a master of her craft. That night, Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion, those men learned the single greatest lesson of their lives. They learned that the measure of a warrior is not the size of their biceps or the volume of their voice. It is the depth of their competence. It is the stillness of their mind in the heart of the storm. It is the courage to act when others are frozen by fear. He looked out at the young faces in the audience, the next generation of SEALs. You'll be tempted by ego. You'll be tempted to judge others based on what you see on the surface, their rank, their gender, their background. I am telling you now, that is a path to failure. The most formidable person in the room is often the one you notice least. True strength doesn't need to advertise. True competence speaks for itself, and its language is action. Your greatest asset will never be the weapon in your hand. It will be the humble, open mind that allows you to recognize the quiet professional standing beside you. His words settled over the crowd, a final, powerful lesson from a revered elder. The story of Anya Sharma, now nameless and mythic, had been officially inscribed into the institutional memory of the SEAL teams. It was no longer just a war story. It was doctrine. The legacy of that single night rippled outward, becoming more than just a lesson. It became a catalyst for change. The special operations community began a slow, deliberate shift in how it vetted and integrated its support personnel. The old prejudices began to erode, replaced by a new culture of professional respect, an understanding that the operator holding the rifle was only one part of a complex, interdependent organism. The Angel program, whether it was a formal unit or simply a designation for the best of the best, remained shrouded in mystery. But the idea of it, the symbol of the quiet professional, became a powerful archetype. People started looking closer at the unassuming intelligence analyst who could find a needle in a global haystack of data, or the quiet logistics officer who could move mountains with a phone call. The concept of the quiet professional expanded beyond the battlefield, becoming a touchstone for excellence in all its forms. Anya Sharma was never seen by Alpha Platoon again. One day, she was simply gone, reassigned with no notice, her file sealed, her presence dissolving back into the classified shadows from which she had emerged. But her impact remained, a permanent mark on the soul of every man who had served with her. Bull Rourke went on to become a Master Chief himself, renowned for his tactical brilliance, but even more so for his humility and his fierce advocacy for his support teams. He never failed to tell her story to new recruits, standing them before the shadow box with a twisted piece of shrapnel. The story became a living legacy, a moral compass for a new generation. It served as a constant reminder that respect is not a birthright of rank or position. It is a debt owed to demonstrated competence. It taught that assumptions are the enemy of survival, and that the person you underestimate is the one who holds the power to change your world. True legacy isn't something you build for yourself. It is the change you inspire in others. It is the lesson that takes root and grows long after you're gone. It is the quiet competence that becomes a silent, enduring standard against which all others are measured, a testament to the simple, profound truth that actions will always speak louder than words. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.